this very unique vantage point of of engaging with literature. So I have benefited immensely from the literary community in Kerala, in specifically in Trivandrum. I've benefited from Poetry Chain. I've benefited from fellow poets like many poets whom I share my work with. So I attend gatherings such as these in Trivandrum, in Ernakulam, wherever there are. And what I write or what I engage with are something which you have provided me. So I'm thankful to the world, to Kerala, to people around. So I'll start off by saying, by a few observations about my own predicament as a writer. So I have these things noted down. So I'll read it out. I've been writing poetry in the English language for about 5 years. And I've been quite successful in making myself visible to my peers. I continue to explore poetry via my own poetry as well as my role as a translator and curator of contemporary poetry in Malayalam, the other language that I have in which I have roots. I write from the perspective of a Dalit poet writing in English. Dalit is a term of political self-identification for India's independent indigenous peoples and those previously called untouchables, who have historically occupied the lowest rung of the subcontinent's caste hierarchies. I try to bring into my poems a wealth of experience from my involvement in various civil rights struggles of the Dalit Bahujans, and also a parallel exploration of intricacies of language in a post-colonial, multicultural world. To be frank, Indian writing in English tends to be nearly exclusively from the upper castes, and poets of my background and socio-political leanings tend to be a rarity on the contemporary Indian English poetry scene. So as you all know, English is a language of privilege. So all of us are in this class. So probably most of you are aware of the kind of access that you have to with this English language, the platform that this language provides, the window of opportunity to access New Delhi, London, or New York, wherever you want your voice to be heard. This opportunity is given to you by the English language, and we all know it's tremendous. It's a tremendous privilege. So if you look at society as a whole, only a microscopic minority, only the cream of the nation has this opportunity to engage in a kind of conversation that we are engaging right now. So in this context, I'd like to briefly talk about an aspect of privilege. So what happens is, I have this opinion that privilege, when someone is privileged, when a writer is privileged, someone who engages with the society is super privileged, what happens is these privileges tend to cataract his vision. He develops too many blind spots, or like men are not really aware of the intensive sexual harassment that women suffer, or people who are upper caste are not really or do not have the first-hand experience of what a Dalit or a Bahujan person or a Muslim person undergoes on his daily life, daily lived experience, etc. Or most of us have absolutely no idea how much of victimization and how much of ostracization a certain queer person suffers right now in contemporary Kerala. It's generally said that our mother tongue of Malayalam has no words for genitals of male or female gender. As a result, queer people suffer an extreme form of othering. As a result, queer people from Kerala, flee to cities like Bangalore, etc. So this is just to put in context. Like where I come from and certain perspectives I may be, I may have harnessed due to my engagement with literature. Given that being a Dalit poet comes inextricably intertwined with a subaltern ethos, and given that writing in English has come to be emblematic of privilege and access to power, given that a Dalit poet comes inextricably intertwined with a subaltern ethos, and given that English language has come to be emblematic of privilege and access to power, I can't but sometimes see myself divided into aspects of privilege and deprivation, colonial and mother tongue. So there is this extreme form of pleasure, privilege, and the joy of being in conversation with a large audience because of the fact that I can deal with the English language. That's a privilege. And myself being a Dalit, like heterosexual Dalit male, living in a very urban locality in Trivandrum, is also is a disadvantage. It's a very marginalized identity. So I have within me both privilege and deprivation. It's like an earth that is half lit. It is like an earth, which is like if you look at the earth from outside of the earth, half of the earth is lit by the sun, and the other half it is still night now. So something like that. So this means that my writing contains elements of self-translation, which in turn offers an audacious possibility for a positive and radical reconstitution of oneself and one's own identity. It is in this context that I've been recently working on a book-length poem that explores translation. So what I'd like to say is that since our our cells are divided between the English language that we may love, that we may be in love with, and the mother tongue, Malayalam, which is not our first language, but it's our mother tongue. We may have a very divided self linguistically, so this which affects our souls. So our very day-to-day life is like that, a translated being. So as a result, I try to look at translation very carefully. I try to look at our relationship with language very carefully. And on top of this, I have an observation that since most of you are in English academia, you're familiar with with the kind of topics on which you do your MA thesis, as well as your MPhil and PhD research. So probably you know that Dalit literature is a big fad in the academia. There is international spotlight on Dalit literature from South Asia. I believe you know it better than me. You've been, you have first experience of like supervising thesis, or your friends doing research on them, or like they are looking for translations of various authors from Kerala and elsewhere, and there are countless number of PhD theses written on them. But here is something, that many have articulated before me. I've tried to do it in my own context. So since there is hardly any Dalit literature directly written in English, and or maybe that Dalit literature in English is just sprouting or just debuting, just becoming visible in the horizon. It's just simmering on the horizon. The hell lot of Dalit literature that we study are literature in translation. So we depend on translation to study Dalit literature, which is a fad in the academy. Hence, I like to critique this act of translation. I like to scrutinize this act of translation. So often I have this claim that most of the time, a Dalit author has absolutely no say in what is getting translated among his works and who is translating it. So there is a blunting of one's agency, one's subversive potential when a particular text undergoes translation. So some of you may disagree with me, or like they may have extremely nuanced opinions on translation. I'm eager to listen to you. Like somebody in the audience, or students, like other faculty, Deepak himself, or anyone. So they may have thought about translation, engaged with translation, themselves done translation. And my claims that, or my observations that, when a text is translated from Malayalam to English, there is a process of taming and political pasteurization that happens. And then when it is being deliberated in the English language, most of the time there is this severe limitation on the potential to move the conscience of the reader that is affected, because it was translated. And most of the time, the very specific cultural assertion, very specific socio-political observations that these people have, which are very much rooted in their language and culture, could go for a toss when something is translated. Go for a toss, translate. So that's why I've tried to look at translation extremely carefully. So I look forward to your views on these if you have either views that corroborate or contradict my claims. So since at least 1972, when Dalit Panthers, a literary as much as a political organization, became the last chapter of Black Panthers, there has been a substantial empathy between Dalit and African American literature. Dalit is a state of existence in India, similar to that of the Afro-Americans in the Western Hemisphere, with the added dimension of spatial pollution. So there is no concept of pollution in the West. It's like people have to maintain a certain degree distance because so-and-so has been rendered impure, untouchable, and polluting and whatever. This concept doesn't exist in the West, but there are all other aspects of caste that uh, Afro-Americans suffer in the Western Hemisphere. Dalit communities deemed untouchable and unapproachable are still segregated in many parts of India and relegated to the ghettos. I consider myself lucky that that my family has overcome insurmountable odds to bring me to where I am today. In my writing, I have certainly been shaped by personal experience of being Dalit in my part of India. Even today, have heard my grandmother being called by her first name. First name. Normally, a younger person calling someone older by their personal name would be considered derogatory in our culture. And many of our non-Dalit neighbors would not consume a morsel of food, or a drop of water from our homes, even if we were slightly financially better off and more prosperous than them, which shows that mere economic prosperity is no solution to annihilate caste. I hope to continue writing in English that explore this grim and intense collective experience of social exclusion, humiliation, social ostracization, albeit in formally innovative ways. My poems may well be among the very first to have such ordeals of casting in English writing from the inside. Okay, now does it even surprise you that we are like 60, 70 years after independence, and there have been no Dalit writers writing in English who have made their voice heard, or there are very rarely other margins also represented in Indian English writing. So Indian English writing has mostly been a very much upper caste forte till now, or maybe like our decade in my decade, we'll see dramatic, drastic, drastic democratization space with a lot of new voices coming in, a lot of voices that engage with the Islamophobia or queer issues, etc. So if these interest you, I like to drop a few observations about stuff happening in Indian English poetry in the last few years. So first of all, there has been this anthology of queer poetry in English, translated in English and also directly in English. So they were edited by, there was a book by name HarperCollins Book of Queer Poetry. So it's called The World Belongs to Us. Okay, so it was edited by two of my friends, Aditi Ankiras and Akhil Katyal, and it's published by HarperCollins, like you can order it online, etc. So it's the first time there is this very comprehensive anthology of queer poetry from all over India, largely written in English, but also translated in English. So for your information, there is this poet Vijaya Raja Mallika from Kerala who writes in Malayalam, who is a transgender person, and in translation in English and published there. That's one major milestone in maybe sort of declassing Indian English poetry. That's one thing. Secondly, probably you're aware of this movement by name Mia poetry. There is a very young and fascinating poet by name Shalim Hussain. Shalim Hussain is from I believe from Assam. He's from the northeast. He has been spearheading a movement by name Mia poetry. So Mia poetry is like it's about the Muslim question in the northeast. It's like an act of resisting the Citizens Amendment Act that has plagued the nation just before Corona. Just before Corona, there was a massive protest on that, and probably due to Corona, like a lot of public spaces are lost. Mia poetry, Shalim Hussain, his anthology that is coming out, and he has been trying to translate from Bangla, from Assamese, from various languages into English, and it's one of the first literary movements in Indian English poetry. That's one thing. Secondly, there was a comment by U.R. Anandamurthy, and sometime in his fag end of his life, fag end of his literary career, that he once lamented that why, how come there are no literary movements in English language in India? How come, like if you look at the various vernaculars, there have been progressive writers association in most vernaculars. There have been writing associations that articulated the leftist worldview. There may have been movements, literary movements that articulated an Ambedkarite or a Islamist worldview. But how come there are no movements in Indian English poetry? So he proved wrong recently with Shalim Hussain. Also, a lot of Dalit poets today are writing in English, maybe about 10 or 15. And there are some really good poets among them too. So these are some aspects that I like to bring into your attention. So about the question, question asked here on how, what do you think about non-Dalit writers writing on Dalit issues? So there's only one distinction. What is written by a Dalit on a Dalit issue, because he has the epistemic privilege of having undergone, possessing first-hand lived experience of being a Dalit, will be categorized as Dalit literature. And non-Dalit writers writing Dalit, about caste will be considered anti-caste literature. But there is nothing wrong in it. But most of the time there is this question of appropriation. There is this question of a very large non-Dalit voice appropriating a Dalit caste issue, and there will questions about agency, questions about there is this slogan recently that we're not supposed to speak in place of a subjectivity that we do not have, and we're just supposed to pass the mic. So I would say that a person who is not really Dalit, but that doesn't mean that he may not have undergone various shades of discrimination that intersect with caste. So a person who is like Bahujan or Muslim may have very intense experiences of his own. So he is like very well within his right to write all that. But maybe he has to be very sensitive to the people who have suffered more than him and have not been fortunate to air their views, who do not get the platform or the medium or the language or the piece of paper or a literary platform. So how does it feel to have make our own voice heard? I think it's a tremendous feeling. I think there is this theory that one of the most fundamental quests a human being has is to have his sensibility observed, is to have his voice heard, or is to is that his soul seeks recognition, validation from a rest of the peers, from his peers. So something like that. So there is tremendous joy in even in having this particular platform in which I'm speaking to all of you, and then I can be in conversation with you. That's tremendously that's a tremendous feeling. Definitely is positive energy, and I don't know. So when I engage with you, it has this effect that your questions and your observations enrich me, and I dig up and have more I don't know, nuance, or have poems that are more diverse or whatever. It's your feedback that strengthens me. So always an audience for my writing definitely is someone that gives me feedback. It's it's like my I don't know, nourishment. It's like a nourishment to the soul, to my soul. Secondly, how do native English speakers, say probably people in America, England, perceive poets from India? That's a very good question. So English poets from India, country like India or like third world or Africa, or who are not native speakers. That's a very interesting question. So, but most of the time, I used to be super surprised that people who are like immigrants into the language, who've learned the language, who for whom English is not a mother tongue, they have a greater degree of commitment and passion for the language that surprise that of the people the white people who read poetry from the rest of the world, say for example say Derek Walcott, or the prose writings of Salman Rushdie, or the English poetry of say Arun Kolatkar or K.K. Daruvala or A.K. Ramanujan or Adil Jasawala, they're like, or Vivek Narayanan, they're like all praise for it. Yeah, they think that they like lot of the third world writers, brown people, have mastered the language better than better than those who speak better than those who inherit the language due to their birth locations. So they'll be surprised at the competence Ms. Kalyani ma'am has on English language, the way she conducts a class, than say somebody like who is a white woman or a white man in UK or in the Americas. So that's the I used to be surprised of that. But maybe there is this I don't know there is this so there is the question about do you think that there are certain experiences that Dalits and tribals undergo that others may not have undergone? That's true. So there is this famous quote. There is this one line from Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know if the pronunciation is correct. Jean-Paul Sartre, French intellectual. That the comment is this: the specific traits of society correspond exactly to the untranslatable locutions of its language. So there is something very specific in the tribal cultural location or the Dalit cultural location or wherever, whichever specific, unique, marginalized cultural location we are talking about. Those societies have something very intrinsic in their language that does not give away to translation so easily. So someone who does not share their subjectivity, representing them in the linguistic realm of literature should be like, I don't know, deconstructed. It's not that these people do not have the right to talk about them or talk about issues or like conscientize the society. They do have, but they should be like very sensitive, very careful, and try not to like appropriate those voices. Yeah. So I was talking about. So there is this interesting story of Derek Walcott, who initially writes poetry, and he compares himself to a kind of like I don't know, like a servant boy or someone, like a boy who's working in a white household. But later on, he becomes the most acclaimed poet, the greatest living poet in the English language. Later on, he becomes that. So then there is this. He's being studied as like how the traditional elites of the English language who inherited perceive writers like Walcott or Naipaul or Salman Rushdie or say Arundhati Roy. How are these writers perceived in the West? I think it's a twin-edged sword. They definitely admire the language and the I don't know the passion that we may have for the language, but then there is also the strength that they look for a very stereotyped version of India. Like they look for that world to uh, write about their being barbarians in such a way that the first world needs to come here and civilize us, something like that. I think the only problem I have with the Western epistemology is that they think that we are behind them in evolution, in human evolution, and there is this white man's guilt kicking into their souls, and these people will come here, or they're like we are now being civilized yet, or something like that. Or there is this stereotype notion about what a writer from India should write about. Probably that is being challenged, or the narrative is much more multidimensional now. So that's very like how women writers, filmmakers are often expected to deal with uniquely feminist issues. Do you think, as someone who identifies himself as Dalit, is expected to address only particular topics that resonate with poems with Dalits in this? As you had mentioned at the outset, Dalit is one of the many subject positions you occupy. Do you think such expectations stifle creativity? Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, that makes my day. So I like to engage with this like this. So the 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 ideal before me, the goal of a poet, the goal of an artist is to make good art. The goal of a poet is to write good poetry. Every aspect of my subjectivity, of anyone's subjectivity, should be subsumed in it. That is, they should add texture and flavor to it, to my pursuit of writing good poetry. So if there is, and also I am rooted in my cultural origins as a Dalit person, but that does not restrict me in any way. I also write about Islamophobia. I also write about uh, the the male gaze. I talk about male gaze. I talk about like Islamophobia. I talk about like aesthetics of the white man clashing with that of the brown person, brown people here. I also talk about the unique experiences someone undergoes in an airport. So some of us land in America or any Western world or anywhere, and there are some unique scrutinizing procedures on us in airports, or like I like to make myself very interdisciplinary or whatever that is. So that's a good question. So most of the time there is this expectation, there is undue expectation that a Dalit poet is naturally expected to write anti-caste poetry, or like anti-caste poetry will be the backbone of his narrative. But that is not really so. That's not really so. Like for example, like a feminist filmmaker who endeavors to make a movie which is about love, which is about experiences of Indians in America, will be capable of articulating her feminist standpoints in a subtle way. We will be able to articulate her feminist standpoints like contained in the form of the art form than in the explicit content. So the more skilled you become in the act of writing poetry, engaging with your art, be it filmmaking, be it painting, be it writing poetry, fiction, non-fiction, anything, etc. So I would believe that somebody who identifies as a writer or an artist of a particular persuasion, it gives an added advantage with respect to the the vision, the plurality of the vision that he or she may harness. I think there was one more question. I'll just go to some of my poems. So my first poem is titled "Killing the Shampuka." Killing the Shampuka. So this poem deals with the myth of Shampuka and Ramayana. So Shampuka is like, I think it's quite a cliche in the literature to deal with Shampuka. Shampuka was like murdered because he transcended certain societal restrictions on what a Shudra could do then. So this poem draws its inspiration from Strange Fruit, which is a poem by Abel Mirapur, and is on the suicide of Dalits and Bahujan students in institutions of higher learning. So I believe all of us remember Rohit Vemula, who had committed suicide on January 17, 2016. There were like protests all over India. Like, I believe these memories are still fresh, at least for those who have participated in the protest. So the poem goes like this: Killing the Shampuka, inspired by a famous poem on black lynching. Jim Crow segregated hostel rooms. Jim Crow segregated hostel rooms. Ceiling fans bear a strange fruit. Ceiling fans bear a strange fruit. Blood on books and blood on papers. Blood on books and blood on papers. A black body swinging in mute silence. A black body swinging in mute silence. Strange fruit hanging from tridents. Strange fruit hanging from tridents. Another poem I have is on intercaste love. Okay, the poem was like I had titled it as On Intercaste Love. Just like the saying goes, tongue has no bonds but can break many. The submissive tuft of hair on the shaved heads of the twice born command an army of henchmen guarding the rest of medieval fences built along caste hymens. The submissive tuft of hair on the shaven heads of the twice born command an army of henchmen guarding the rest of medieval rest built along caste hymens. I don't know. I kind of think that there was a recent issue. Probably you remember that a young man by name Kevin was killed by the family of his wife because he dared to marry outside of his caste. Probably these are in your memory. Then So, so the next poem is titled Kiss of Love. Kiss of Love. Two pairs of lips lock in a kiss, losing the sense of time. Losing the sense of time. Heads turn to adjust wristwatches from a public clock. Heads turn to adjust wristwatches from a public clock. Locked lips turn the wheel of time like prophets. Locked lips turn the wheel of time like prophets. There's a poem. So there's a question. How much inclusive? How much inclusive should the term Dalit be? So I would argue that the term Dalit should apply to anyone. The term Dalit should apply to anyone who has been or any section of society or any marginalized persuasion. Anyone who has a particular leanings, who have been excluded from the act of history writing. So the definition for Dalits by Dalit Panthers included all women, included all people who are not like heterosexual, upper caste, male, urban dwelling, etc. Other than the super privileged. Yeah, other than the super privileged elite of society, anyone who is like marginalized in some way, that used to be the definition of Dalit. So I think the word Dalit has to undergo a change in connotation over time. Like everybody, every society has to transform itself in an anti-caste stride, transform itself along an anti-caste stride. And the word Dalit should be much more and accumulative. Like I don't know, the right word. It should be like a word that has many dimensions of meaning for various people. There is a kind of untranslatability with regard to translation of Dalit literature from Malayalam. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. There is. There's a question on in YouTube. Is there a kind of untranslability with regard to the translation of the literature? Definitely. So if you look at so forget Dalit literature. Look at the works of Vaikom Muhammad Bashir. So he has a lot of words that are like so specific to his own his own cultural location or his very unique experiences that he has, etc. So I'll be very interested on how these these expressions they carry over to English. So will we find will we be able to find a very suitable cultural equivalences in English? These are questions for you to ponder on. Or if Vaikom Muhammad Bashir is not alive today, someone is translating his works. So the author is not alive to correspond with him. So how would you make us make a choice, or like how would you be convinced that so and so is the right translation? And are you inadvertently engaging in an act of violence, or like you can interrogate yourself? How crucial is the role of poets in the cultural assimilation among future generations? I think poets have a very big role. I think most good poets, most poets who are like what is it, delving deep into poetry, they deal with language. They have the language has its future in poetry. Poets handle language. So the future of our world, our cultural worlds are in language. So any form of like reduction in mutual animosity, poets can help in many ways. Yeah. So I'll continue my reading my poems. Like you can ask questions. Like I'll try my best to engage with the questions raised. Love in the time of CCTV. In my rear view mirror is a motherfucking law. It's a line from Jay-Z's 99 Problems. There's a rapper named Jay-Z. Jay-Z has some songs, like rap songs, which are like critiques of society from an Afro-American perspective. Most notable among them is 99 Problems. 99 Problems. So there is this line from a song, in the lyrics of the song. In my rear view mirror is a motherfucking law. Love in the time of CCTV. The camera tells us, keep your hands where I can see them. Write your love letter. Camera tells us, keep your hands where I can see them. Write your love letter. Second, of lovers whose bodies smell of each other, TSEL8. Of lovers whose bodies smell of each other, TSEL8. Queer pride march, like cops escorting us on either sides. Like every alphabet of the poem is being order tested for the scent of the other. Queer pride march, with cops escorting us on either sides. Like every alphabet of the poem is being order tested for the scent of the other. So I'll read the poem titled, uh, it's called Beef. Okay, so probably you get the connotation behind the word beef. Like someone says beef, so it has two strands, I believe. One is that it has a very subversive, anti-Brahminical connotation. The fact that consumption of beef results in it has its origins in non-touchability. Even today, beef festivals are organized as protesting in Sangh Parivar against right-wing fascist forces, or the other connotation is like where is the beef, is like where is the state effect, I don't know, where is that sense of what you're going to say. So that way there is beef, no? People ask this question, where is the evidence in the, like you say, you try to say something, and where does how substantial you are. There is always a problem of defining political identity in matters of inclusion, in the matters of inclusion. For example, like most of the time we define a political identity, so we are automatically constructing another. So this construction of another is always problematic. Just like there is this question, there was a question raised on uh, how subaltern all the women are, or like how intersectional should any politicized articulation be, like or if there are subcaste issues within the Dalits, like there is very crystal clear untouchability between these various subcastes within the Dalit community. Or what about the ruptures within the Dalit community on account of class and I don't know, other aspects of other parameters of academic or cultural eliteness. So, for example, the entire Dalit community is definitely not a monolithic group. There is subcaste within them. There is brutal untouchability within the Dalits, in the sense that some communities claim to be in a scale of ascending reverence on a higher note, on a higher level, whatever that is. Or like how does a Dalit woman articulate her strand of Dalit feminism? Like, does she, like, I don't know, align with the Dalit movement in what is it, prioritizing caste over gender, or is it that, I don't know, that's for Dalit feminists to speak on? So these are interesting questions. Like no one probably has a, I don't know, final word or whatever. These are pertinent issues that need to be discussed, and like a more nuanced opinions have to evolve, and so and so forth and henceforth on this. So I'll go to my poem. It's titled Beef Poem. Probably you are aware of the connotations behind the word beef. My harvest of poems will be winnowed. If done deftly, the lighter, shallow poems are blown away, while the meatier, heavier poems fall back into the tray to become the fire in my belly like beef. My harvest of poems will be winnowed. If done deftly, the lighter, shallow poems are blown away, while the meatier, heavier poems fall back into the tray to become the fire in my belly like beef. For some poets, beef is a locus of all the food for thought in the world, like Buddha's begging bowl. For some poets, beef is a locus of all the food for thought in the world, like Buddha's begging bowl. A dead cow preserved in formalin, like Hitler's penis in a museum. A dead cow preserved in formalin, like Hitler's penis in a museum. Discard a myth like a piece of meat, a vestigial organ being operated upon. A unique experience in Kerala, which probably most of you are familiar with. It is the it's how this poem deals with how caste works in Kerala. Kerala is very unique. Kerala is a state with extremely high human resource, human development indices. Like Kerala is like very literate. Kerala has something called positive sex ratio, which means there are more women than men in Kerala, which is considered very healthy for a population. So, and we have certain standards of life which are comparable to first world nations. Okay, so but then this experience is so unique to Kerala that I have made a poem out of this. The poem is titled "A Local Train Conversation." The poem is titled "A Local Train Conversation." So there is an epigraph from Ashish Nandi. The epigraph is this: cricket is an Indian sport accidentally discovered by the British. Cricket is an Indian sport accidentally discovered by the English. The poem goes, a local train conversation. As the station moves, I glance at the elderly man seated opposite me, still like an inanimate cog in a wheel. As the station moves, I glance at the elderly man seated opposite me, still like an inanimate cog in a wheel. His insidious queries insist with his Swiss knife tongue are like a handshake prolonged to probe the pulse of my wrist. His insidious queries are like a handshake prolonged to probe the pulse of my wrist. He tries assessing me with an in-swinger first. What's your full name? Then he tries an outswinger that seems a lot. And what's your father's name? By this time, he loses his nerve and tries on a direct Yorker. What is your caste? So there's a question which says, are Dalit writers forced to become political owing to their caste location? When it comes to Dalit experiences, we often see the political aspect of it always getting foregrounded. Beyond that, an art for art's sake sort of thing possible from the Dalit view? That's a very good question. I think that's a very good question. So this is what I try to try to articulate in I try to say in the first first 15 minutes of this conversation. So the fact that a Dalit writer exists, somebody who writes, who engages with English language, and he identifies himself as a Dalit writer, this automatically triggers a conversation with non-Dalit writer to deconstruct his privilege. So, so it is not all. It is desirable that a Dalit writer is not always under pressure to to bring in anti-caste themes, content in his writing. He can pursue his vision like unfettered. He can pursue his vision with no strings attached, with no no tethers on, with no restrictions or forced political leanings. But it will be part of his nuanced perspective on art, on the act of writing, on what he internalizes from the surrounding, to incorporate all that he wants to say, which is part of his political articulation, to be ingrained in his work of art. Maybe I've made myself clear. That is like, so what I claim is that when a queer person writes a love story, it has many shades of subversion encoded into it, which a non-queer person may have never thought of. Even if the queer person does not want to identify as a queer writer. That's where your nuanced perspective kicks in. So that's what I would hope to, like that any writer is not under pressure to write about anything. Like a writer can pursue his vision like a kite flying in the sky, severed from the thread. So, so talking about the pressures on a writer, that the question just before, the question that was raised just now articulated. So I have this poem titled Plus-Sized Poem. So I'll read it now. Probably it seems very relevant to our conversation. This poem refuses to be the world's wife. This poem refuses to be the world's wife. This poem is not pimple-free. Is printed on rough paper. This poem is not pimple-free. Is printed on rough paper. This poem has cellulite in its rear end. Its rump outsizes itself off the market. This poem has cellulite in its rear end. Its rump outsizes itself off the market. This poem walks the ramp with a self-edited gait, without introduction or forward from veterans. This poem walks the ramp with a self-edited gait, without introduction or forward from veterans. This poem does not opt for offshore liposuction to make oneself eligible for international prizes. This poem does not opt for offshore liposuction to make oneself eligible for international prizes. This poem eludes a trap in the hourglass of time. This poem eludes a trap in the hourglass of time. Yeah, I'll respond to this question. While attempting a critique of the poems or a research on poetry, if the individual himself is not a poet, how should we take to reading poetry? Okay, so the question is like this. Someone who's not a poet, who does not identify as a poet, okay, he or she wants to is like researching on poetry. So I think the answer is like simple. Just read as much as you can. Just familiarize yourself with various strands of poetry that are in circulation right now. So if you are like bilingual, you know Malayalam and you know English. If you know Malayalam, so read poems of K.I. Panikar, K. Sachidanandan, K.G. Chandrapillai, D. Vinaychandran, S. Joseph, M.B. Manoj, P.N. Kobikrishnan, whom are you like? Read poems thoroughly, like in Malayalam. Also read poems in English. So if you are glued to Indian English poetry, read A.K. Ramanujan, Arun Kolarkar, K.K. Daruvala, Adil Jasawala, Aga Shahidali. Like Aga Shahidali is a very important, very good poet. Probably these voices, and then familiarize yourself with the art of poetry, how a metaphor is used, or how to make yourself familiar with the Indian English idiom that is used in contemporary Indian English poetry. So this will help you to research or read poetry. Now also maybe probably there is this poem by name Vikkar, like Stammer by K. Sachidanandan, in which he says that there is always ambiguity or uncertainty or this property of being open to interpretation that poetry has. That's the heart and soul of poetry. So you have a poem. We have like 8 lines of poetry presented to you. It may mean something totally different to someone else than you. And all these myriad perspectives are equally valid and possible as a beauty of poetry. So it's just having an open mind, read as much as I can, and harness all those interpretations into like your understanding of what poetry is. So I have this poem which is called Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath. So probably Grapes of Wrath is a title, is a phrase you're familiar with. This poem is written on the theme of innumerable number of migrant laborers that we have in Kerala right now. So Kerala state has only a population of about 3.5 crores. There are already 35 lakh migrant laborers from, say, Orissa, West Bengal, like Delhi, wherever, Northeast, and people who are so much Kerala, which is a tradition, egalitarian tradition, this is supposedly extremely high, living standards and perspectives and left-leaning mindset and whatever. No, like, but we treat the migrant laborers extremely, no, we treat them very bad, very badly. So, this, my poem is a take on that. Grapes of Wrath, a poem on migrant laborers in Kerala. The displaced of capital have come to the capital. Annie Winters. So Annie Winters is a poet from the US. She has this collection. It's called, I don't know, Capital or something. So I use a phrase from a line from a poem as an epigraph. The displaced of capital have come to the capital. Annie Winters. Faceless migrant lads tread landscapes of tongues to be greeted with a lisping embrace at God's own country. Faceless migrant lads tread landscapes of tongues to be greeted with a lisping embrace at God's own country. And God's own country is a phrase used by the tourism department of government of Kerala for a long time. So my next poem is titled Life Has to Go On After Paris Terror Attack. Life has to go on. Who are the suicide bombers sneaking into a poem? Who are the suicide bombers sneaking into a poem? Maybe it was a vernacular river buried deep under a signboard that had seceded from the poem to become a landmine. Maybe it was a vernacular river buried deep under a signboard that had seceded from a poem to become a landmine. Maybe it is a tongue spoken by the vanquished minority, bent like a question mark to touch the feet of the despot before triggering a fireball. Maybe it is the tongue spoken by the vanquished minority, bent like a question mark to touch the feet of the despot before triggering a fireball. Maybe the loud explosions were the shrieks of vowels and consonants, perennially silenced in the national anthem. Maybe the loud explosions were shrieks of vowels and consonants, perennially silenced in the national anthem. More poems have to be written. Life has to go on. Yeah, that's a good question. Do you think if a poem or artwork is to be qualified as good, political correctness is a very vast philosophical aspect of philosophical I don't know topic, whatever, philosophical question that every writer, anyone, any responsible human being has to like has to grapple with. So it's interesting that writers like Pablo Neruda or A. Ayyappan in Kerala, who wrote in Malayalam, their legacy is being today critiqued. Their legacy is today interrogated in the light of the Me Too movement, or their legacy is critique for their, I don't know, certain kind of, not for these writers, but many writers who may have had public record of engaging in acts which are considered extremely regressive as per notions of today. I think this question also rhymes with certain toppling of statues. A lot of statues of icons, cultural icons of yesteryear, who did have a role in the perpetuation of slavery, in the institution of slavery. Those statues were recently uninstalled, but toppled. Statues desecrated and destroyed and like removed from like prime locations all over the Western Hemisphere. Just like statues of Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who is revered as a father of modern nation, like a father of India, like father of the nation for the Indians. By the state, like his statues were like pulled down, like removed from some universities in Ghana and South Africa, wherever in African continent, because there have been observations about his racist about certain racist attitude, perspectives he did have, which he did write down as a matter of public record. So my take on my take on this is part of righting a wrong. This is like this is part of what is setting as setting a what is it? Correcting a past mistake, or something like the wrath of history unleashing on this generation. The wrath of history, that is, those who have been repressed or whose stories were hidden, like women who've been abused from time immemorial. Like they did get a modicum of a voice in the Me Too movement, or the blacks of the Western Hemisphere who've suffered like slavery, indenture, servitude, like like extreme form of oppression for like last 400 years, are now having a Black Lives Matter moment, and the course of history is being altered, bringing in their perspectives. So I would very much welcome much more nuanced perspective in which legacy of, so for example, if you look at the writers like Gunter Grass, who was like critiqued for his participation in Nazi pogroms. That's one thing. The Nobel Prize for the recent Nobel laureate, Peter Handke. I don't know if the pronunciation is right. It's Peter Handke. So he was heavily criticized for his views on Yugoslavia, the murder of Serbs or whatever. He was an open supporter of Slobodan Milosevic. So that was like very much critiqued the moment. So I think uh, these are questions that I don't know. These are questions that will haunt the moral conscience of any nation, any society for time to come. For these will haunt us throughout, and and but that is with respect to the with respect to the claims or like the interrogation that any culture like icon is being subject to today. I would like to also like to add that every person, everyone is a product of their times, is a product of their times. Every writer. So let's say someone like uh, Rimbaud, or the Rimbaud, French poet, or the Rimbaud, or someone like whoever. They are like products of their times, and the regressive elements that were present in those times will be reflected in their work. So I don't know how should we interrogate legacy of such a person from a much more egalitarian, much more nuanced, much more like I don't know, democratized worldview that the contemporary society has today. But from this perspective, how do we interrogate his legacy? So I think it's a mixed bag. It's maybe it's unfair on his legacy to be judged or studied from today's standpoint. That's one thing. Secondly, even if today there were statues of statues or like people who are revered today. So let's say if there are innumerable monuments named after Sri Narayana Guru or Ayangali or Koigelapachan, etc. These may not have the desired effects that they are supposed to have in democratic society. So naming of public monuments in the name of in the names of social icons uh, like those who have strived for the social renaissance in Kerala, probably like occasionally they become merely a safety valve. The principles and values for which Sri Narayana Guru or Ayangali had lived, they have been forgotten, or those are brushed on the carpet, or Dalits continue to suffer or similar kind of discrimination they used to suffer in the times of Ayangali. Then what is the point in naming VJT Hall after Ayangali, or having a lot of statues of Sri Narayana Guru all over Kerala when caste is so very much present in our social life all the time. So I can read some poems from my forthcoming book of poems. It's called Love After Babel. Uh, it is called Love After Babel, and it has these poems that I've just completed. So I can read it out for you. So this poem is titled 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Burkini. This poem is titled 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Burkini. I created the burkini to give women freedom, not to take it away. Aheda Saniti. I created the burkini to give women freedom, not to take it away. Aheda Saniti. I believe most of you know what burkini is. Burkini was a garment invented in France or like wherever, so that women can like surf in the sea. Muslim women can surf in the sea, and it's some kind of some kind of has elements of burqa and maybe bikini in it. So that's the way it is. 13 ways of looking at a black burkini. I created the burkini to give women freedom, not to take it away. Aheda Saniti. One. One. Burkini is a language, terrifying those ignorant of its text. Burkini is a language, terrifying those ignorant of its text. Second, cops patrol her tan lines like dams patrolling rivers flowing above danger marks. Cops patrol her tan lines like dams patrol rivers flowing above danger marks. 3. All you need is in that bag. Change into a garment more palatable for the cops in uniform. All you need is in that bag. Change into a garment more palatable for cops in uniform. Some garments cling too close to your name, like a metaphor, too loud for good poetry. Some garments cling too close to your name, like a metaphor, too loud for good poetry. Sea surfing can be tiring, like an infinite ebb and flow of a questionnaire. Batting an eyelid can be a tad too immodest. Tether yourself close to the beach. Do not surf too deep into the ocean. Never self-intersect in knots and tangles. Bruises sustained from frisking metamorphose into festering wounds. Gangrene could gnaw at your surname. 8. Erase your footprints from the sands. Waves of time rarely wash the footprints of a scuffle. Prolonged scuffle can bury us all in a hole. Do you remember the first corpse the sea sucked off a turbulent beach? The sea spat it out after 3 days of frisking. Do you remember the first corpse the sea sucked off a turbulent beach? The sea spat it out after 3 days of frisking. The footprints of a scuffle implicates you from shore to shore, blowing up all bridges between you and me, you and anyone. Section 10. The footprints of scuffle implicates you from shore to shore, blowing up all bridges between you and anyone. 11. During this conversation, some territory has been ceded across the tan lines of your body. During this conversation, some territory has been ceded across the tan lines of your body. Section 12. Your body stripped of the garment remains in evacuated language. Can a language be a scarecrow? Your body stripped of the garment remains an evacuated language. Can a language be a scarecrow? 13. History will catch up with you in your rear view mirror, even if you're full throttle in your pursuit of happiness. History will catch up with you in your rear view mirror, even if you're full throttle in your pursuit of happiness. In this decade, like post 2020, there'll be like a lot of voices in English poetry, a lot of voices, and they're so diverse, like so, lot of very diverse voices. And I don't think there is a standardized aesthetic, or like a particular kind of poetry is perceived as the holy grail or whatever, as having possessing a cultural hegemony over other strands of poetry. I doubt it. But I've generally observed that Indian English poetry is very politically pasteurized. It's like too elitist. Indian English poetry is today dominated by people who are like super privileged, who are like upper caste, upper class, who did have their education abroad. Like most of them are like so westernized. etc. But in my generation, I think poets are like much more aware of what is being written all over the world. They're aware of Anglophone poetry globally, thanks to the internet, thanks to the online social platforms. We are today aware of like Wars and Share. We are today aware of like Kavi Akbar, or like we today read Kavi Akbar, Dana Smith, Wars and Share, or like the poets who've come to Madhurimi Literary Festival, or or like poets from around the world. So for example, there used to be a poet by name Madhu Raghavendra recently who had a who had a poem on why art is essential even in the time of this pandemic. When there was a newspaper poll where like art was categorized as something which is non-essential, and other stuff like healthcare, or like access to food, access to like other civic amenities was considered a priority over art. And he did have a poem that critiqued art, critiqued this perspective that art is non-essential. And that poem went viral, and like now I think there is a there are a multitude of voices, and like I don't know, there is absolutely no compulsion to conform to any particular form or strand of poetry, or be it imagist, or like which is like a song tradition, or you have a poem that is more oriented towards performance, or you have poems that have a performative element superseding other aspects of poetry, or whatever, anything. You can even attempt to write poems in English that have very important Malayalam words. I don't know. You can attempt poems that have that borrow from the tradition of folk songs in Kerala, or from reggae music in the Caribbean, or rap music the world over. I believe there is no standardized, but I see that like compared to the vernacular counterpart, poetry in Malayalam language, like it's so diverse. Like there are, it's generally said that there are like thousands of poets in Trivandrum district alone. So who may have like as many different styles of writing as there are poets. So I'm waiting for that kind of like, I don't know, diversification, or a process of declassing. Today, this English poetry is considered like upper classist or whatever, having an upper class ethos. I'm waiting for English poetry to be much more like to have like at least 100 tribal poets writing in English, at least 100 Dalit poets writing in English, 100 Muslim poets writing English, or various like various strands of feminism, amply represented uh, in the in the various feathers of Indian English poetry, something like that. But I don't think there is a uniform aesthetic. But English poetry has not evolved as much as I would want to, or compared to its Western counterpart like Anglophone poetry in other parts of the world, notably Caribbean. Indian English poetry, like I believe, is in its root. So this poem is a part of my ongoing work in progress, which is titled "Love After Babel." So probably you're aware of the myth of Babel, like so it was the Babel from the Bible. So this poem is conceived in the form of a newspaper report. So this is like a newspaper article that has been cut and pasted onto your screens, and this is how the poem is like envisioned. So I'll read out. Like I'll be eager to listen to your comments on it. Accident at a river. Accident at a river. Accident following a wrangling over naming of rivulets. Accident at a river. Accident following a wrangling over naming of rivulets. Staff reporter. Company, November 5th. 20 bodies of poets and translators were recovered from the shores or the river banks of a river near the state capital. The bodies were like couplets intertwined, and the river crisscrossed the border between the two states, built along thoughts on linguistic states. The camp director had warned the participants of the translation workshop that the spirits of other participants could leap into theirs, and each of them were given aliases like a plastic steering oar that never yields to either streams of the river. The poets claimed that to be baptized in a form of poetry in another language, it was necessary to nosedive into a particular river. Some of the translators were also language teachers. They allegedly danced on the hanging bridge, hoping that their students weren't around. Another prospective reason for the onset of the wrangle was that poets demanded dope during their short recesses. They insisted that. So I think this is an example where I've tried to, I've tried to, I've tried to engage with a form. So probably a Dalit poet or a writer is not expected to write about translation. He's expected to write about atrocity or Ambedkar or possibilities of intercaste love or like the daily humiliation that a Dalit soul undergoes every day. So like he's not expected to write about translation or say about language or the linguistic exclusion or the limits on our society because of the limits on our languages, limits of the languages, etc. So here I've tried to be very experimental. One of the okay. So I'll try to deal answer that. So this is like I've tried to look at an imaginary newspaper report and certain emotional tussles that we may have with respect to the language we are comfortable with. So whether we speak in our mother tongue or like whether we have an acquired language or like or if something is being lost, something is being lost in translation, or something is not authentic when you attempt that in English. So for example, we have a poetry activism. So what is your take on the aesthetics of the poetry? Oh, good. Yeah. So I've tried to do this, which is like I don't know, challenging myself or challenging the stereotype or like trying to engage with the mind of a very discerning reader, a reader who wishes to surprise, who wishes to read something that surprises his preconceived notions, etc. So that was my attempt. So you may, I don't know, tell me anything. So I have a few more questions. Okay, yeah. Which is that one topic that gave you that you wrote a poem on and gave you full satisfaction as a poet, and why? Usually, Dalit poetry is considered as poetic activism. What is your take on the aesthetics of Dalit poetry? Can you speak on the present-day international experimentation versification, also by the absorption? Okay, very good questions. Very good questions. So my first, the question on that one topic that I wrote and they gave me good satisfaction as a poet. So I like to share with you a small story, like an experience of mine that. So I did attempt this poem on Burkini, which is like a take, which is like a what is it? Riff, which is like a riff, which is like a rewriting of the iconic Wallace Stevens poem. Wallace Stevens poem, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. So I look at that poem, I try to make something similar or like get a shot of inspiration from it and write a poem which has completely different content but has the same form and structure. It's like 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Burkini. Now in this poem, I send this to Srinivas Rapport Prize. So this poem gets shortlisted. No, it does not win the prize, but it gets shortlisted, and then I have this this observation in my resume that I was once a shortlist for Srinivas Rapport Prize. So the judge was KK and Daruvala. So of course the poems are sent to him anonymously. There is this. We are supposed to have no traces of our identity in that sufficient manuscripts. The manuscript that we submit, the poems that we submit, on who we are. So it is given to them, and they take printouts, and the judges read them, and they assign the prices, and then once the results are announced, like it's revealed that judges KK Daruvala. So I used to be in email correspondence with him much later. So he did have this remark that your poems came to me in the bunch along with the bunch of the Srinivas Rapport Prize, and then I did read this poem, 13 Ways of Looking at me. So of course I liked it. That's why it's in the shortlist. But he had this interesting observation. I thought the author was Muslim, so he assumed that someone who engages with the question of the question of Islamophobia or Burkini or the fashion statement that a Muslim woman may want to make. These, when I did attempt a poem on these, and this was when this poem was probably well received, he had a remark. KK Daruvala, the acclaimed poet, had a remark that I thought this was written by a Muslim.
So that was like, that was a like a moment in which, I try to articulate a position of someone of a particular subjectivity, which is not something that I'm naturally endowed with. I need to learn that and then articulate it. And I did that, and then someone who reads it says like, I thought it was written by a Muslim. But that was a moment I received a lot of satisfaction. So that is one topic. So it's like Islamophobia, frisking, Islamophobia, all these, all these contours of social exclusion and inclusion. These are areas I like to explore. And I dream of possessing a language, like learning a language or acquiring the skill in the language to express these concerns evocatively enough for the community to own me up as one of their voices. Yeah. So that is where that is where uh, uh, that is where I did receive a lot of satisfaction. The other question on like Dalit poetry, the aesthetics of Dalit poetry and protest poetry. So I think the protest element should be subsumed in the text of the language that Dalit poetry has. So one major observation I have about the aesthetics of Dalit poetry is that Dalit poetry often embraces a language that is often considered vulgar or like uncouth or like I don't know, language of the gutters or like language which is not sanitized or like very Puritan, whatever. These elements which are shunned by the puritanical puritanical whatever people what is being shunned by them is what Dalit literature, Dalit poetry embraces or embodies. So that is a fundamental aesthetical point, like aesthetical observation that I have about Dalit poetry. What Dalit poetry represents is like it's the language that is soiled from the real life lived experience of a Dalit or who is ostracized or like who is in a constant stage of constantly maneuvering his day-to-day existence with Brahminism, who was like what is it, maneuvering his day-to-day life with capitalism or other forms of oppression on him. It is this aspect of engagement that distinguishes Dalit poetry from the rest of the strands in poetry. So the element of protest should be subsumed in it. That's what I would stress on. So what was the other question? Yeah. So can you speak on the present day international experimentation and versification? I think that was a very good question. So if I were to pinpoint certain like bright examples of certain experimental poems attempted by various poets, what is it? We have internet poetry sensations like Rupi Kaur. Okay, Rupi Kaur, K. Meera. There is a question on directly related to the subject in discussion. Creative minds are generally seen to be more sensitive and attuned to human emotions. How has the current pandemic and the ensuing state of uncertainty affected? Yeah, I'll answer these questions one by one. So there was this question by Navanita on what gave me satisfaction as a poet. So I have just answered that. So in short, it was my engagement with Islamophobia, and someone like K.K. Darawala commenting on that this poem may have been. So that gave me a lot of satisfaction. So it's like probably I don't know, or like if I attempt something on which critiques heteronormativity, like heterosexual normativity, and if a queer person is able to relate to that, that is a moment that will give me satisfaction. So it's like something that gives me satisfaction is where I push myself. I try to go beyond my comfort zones and attempt poetry that doesn't come, that may not come naturally to me as I perceive it, and I try to excel in it. So that's where I get satisfaction. So usually Dalit poetry considered as poetry activism. What is your take on aesthetics of poetry? I think my take on aesthetics of Dalit poetry would be that Dalit poetry has a very tangy language, as a very rustic language. So like Dalit poetry in English, when it comes of age, when it becomes like worthy of international scrutiny, will have a radically different idiom and vocabulary that the privileged poets may have never dealt with dealt with. So these are my comments on aesthetics. So about international versification. So I think globally Anglophone poetry is very, very diverse and very experimental. Very I run out of adjectives to call the vivaciousness or the fertility that global Anglophone poetry today has. So some interesting observations are these. You should look into the poetry collection Citizen by Claudia Rankin, where she has like pushed the frontiers of what we perceive as poetry. She has poems in which there are works of art incorporated. There are numerous accounts of microaggressions committed on her soul, like how she's forced to wait more than usual at a grocery store because she is black, or she is perceived as a potential. She is often profiled as sources of. She's often profiled as a criminal uh, um, before being proven guilty, until proven not guilty. It's like a lot of people are like Afro Americans, the West, are profiled as criminals until they are proven not guilty, or something like that. So Claudia Rankin Citizen is something you should look into. There is a poet by name Gregory Paldo. Gregory Paldo is in New York, Columbia University. He has some poems in the form of a book review. He has a poem in the form of a book review. That could be something. That was a interesting experimentation that I did come across. And also there was a poet in South Africa by name Koleka Putuma, Koleka Putuma, Koleka Putuma, who had poems in the form of which really worked on the form, which was like there was interesting ways to use a footnote, or there were interesting ways to use I don't know, these forms that may have been evolved from your Facebook post, or like the timeline of your Facebook, or like I don't know. She is somebody you would want to scrutinize if you're a student of experimental poetry. And there is this poet Vivek Narayanan from India, who has a new book of poems coming out shortly, which is like a 4-volume book on poetry. So on Ramayana, which is like a reworking of Ramayana. So he has very interesting experimental stuff where he dwells on the modern state of the art weapons, modern state of the art weapons, and where he deals with it's very experimental. It's for you to look up. So I believe that that's an interesting observation that Deepak requested on, like if I could comment on experimental poetry. But I believe that Indian English poetry is still stuck in the old school. Like most poets write usual free verse poetry, where like the form is not being tested. They're not really testing the form. So no, they're not testing the form. So these are some poets I like to suggest about experimentation that a lot of brave poets have attempted. So there is this experimental aspect of performance. Like when you bring in a performative text, there is experimentation. For example, there is a work of art by M.R. Vishnu. There's a Malayalam poet named Vishnu Prasad who did have an experiment about Ambedkar's speech being posted on the wall, and there is this voice. There's this headphone attached to it. Like we could listen to it, and then it's expected that a text would play. There's a sound of the text being read out, but when we listen to it, it's like silence. So which is like a very nuanced political take on how Ambedkar's ideals are relevant today and not being studied enough. Or like his speech at Jat Paat Tod Mandal was couldn't be delivered because of difference of opinion with that organization. So experimentation is where you really test your sincerity as an artist, as a poet, as a writer. So these poets you should really look into. And there are some literary magazines that very much seek poems that are experimental, as they call it. And there is also this yearly edition of Best of Experimental Poetry being published in the US. I forget who's the name of the editor, but there's something called the Best of American Poetry, which is edited by David Lehman. But there is something, there's another stamp, another parallel, venture, which is like experimental poetry. So I don't know, you can explore the world as you like it. Yeah, and what are your views on? Do you have a method in your poetry? Is there a reader in your mind while you're writing? So before that, so what are your views on Instagram poet like Rupi Kaur? I don't know. I have mixed views on her. Like she's both a boon and a bane. So I would imagine that Rupi Kaur, first of all, I believe most of her posts, like most of what she writes, does not qualify as poetry in the conventional sense of poetry. That's one thing. Secondly, she has played a role to popularize the written word as we understand it today, though it is not really poetry. But I would assume that uh, if Rupi Kaur has 1 million followers on Instagram, that is something that encourages me encourages me in the sense that more than the yardstick of critical acclaim being published by Faber or Bloodaxe, if it is your ability to reach out to people, reach out to readers, to reach out to laymen, to reach out to whoever is a reader. Maybe in that way, being Rupi Kaur is, I don't know, Rupi Kaur has done that, or probably it's true. But then I'm always suspicious of an art form that has wide popular resonance. Now, most of the time, I would want to believe that a very nuanced work of art that pushes the frontiers of our thought process are very unlikely is very unlikely to become as popular as Rupi Kaur's online persona. So like people say that poetry is very subversive. Like poetry is the most subversive of the written art forms. Poetry is more subversive than poetry. Sorry, either poetry is more subversive than short story or a novel, because poetry has market. They say that market. Even very acclaimed poets self-publish their books of poetry. That is, they give a substantial amount of money to any publishing house, and they publish. So they published it. So it's like a poet publishing himself and selling the book via Amazon or in his friend circle. Only very institutional poets. Only poets who have like I don't know, lucky enough to get corporate publishers, major publishers. So this element of not having a market is often cited as a reason why poetry is very subversive. So people like Rupi Kaur creating a market for poetry, I'm suspicious. That's all I can say. There's a question, not directly, not direct. So how has pandemic affected you? So a lot of people say that, you know, for a writer, this corona, like the lockdown due to corona, has been is a blessing in disguise, that you can concentrate on writing and you can stay indoors, you can minimize social contact. But that's not true. That's all bullshit. So what I feel is that you know, like lack of social interaction, myself being locked in, like you know, confined indoors, all these have affected affected me adversely. I believe that even if the pandemic has no religion or caste or gender or whatever, the social inequities become more stark during these trying times than before corona. So I think, so like I believe that though I get a lot of time to write, because there are other activities have been uh, uh, are lesser now. I still believe all these pandemic and everything, they take a toll on your emotional self, and then it's not really good for your overall life as a human being. Is there a gap between Dalit poets writing in English and those writing in regional languages? As activism translation, it's a gap. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, That's a very good question. So I always felt that so if somebody writes in English, the minimum audience or readership that he can aspire for is quite large, and they are very discerning. Like the platforms that publish English poetry, they might be very scrutinizing, and like you could get a criticism. Like we could seek a criticism of a very high aesthetic when we write in English and publish in international platforms. So there is definitely a gap between vernacular poets in English and the poets in English, because like as like a lot of the essence of their poetry, or like the heart and soul of their poetry, say from Tamil or Malayalam, when translated in English, could be lost. And these are so like I believe that this vernacular poet suffers on the visibility level. Like he wouldn't be able to like make himself audible to the to a much larger audience other than his vernacular audience. That is the flip side to it. And activism translation bits like that, definitely they have. So for example, like even literary activism of translating, or like special issues on Dalit literature from Tamil, from Malayalam, from Marathi, etc. They do help in bridging this gap. Do you have a method in your poetry? Is there a reader in your mind while you're writing a poem? No, I do not have a method. I do not have a method. Most of the time, I try to like edit the poem a lot of times, edit it, work on it, like chase a very nuanced expression in a poem, like look for the lines that really move you, etc. But I do not have a reader in mind and all. But I believe the first reader of my own poem is myself, and I am constantly being reborn every day. So yeah, prior to this discussion, I was a different person. Like the questions you have raised here, my effort to respond to these questions evolved my soul. My thought process, my sense of who I am is very much altered before this event and after this event. This event. So like in that way, like maybe my poems are like constantly evolving, because I am the first reader of the poem, and like it is being rewritten for my, as per my own aesthetic. Your take on having your English poems translated to vernacular languages, especially to Malayalam, would there be a loss or gain in translation? That's a very good question. So I think I'm very apprehensive about being translated into Malayalam language. So like I always feel that I've worked hard in a lot of my poems. I've really worked hard to make it sound like very elegant in the English language. And when translated to Malayalam, uh, it could all go for a toss. So there is definitely a element of fear or apprehension, or I don't know, when my works will be, if my poems are to be translated from English to any language. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chandramohan sir.